Welcome to 30 Degree Shift, a weekly exploration of absurdity, perception, and the quiet mechanics of being human. I'm William T. Torgerson, and today's essay is called The Weight of Invisible Work. Sometimes, magic is just spending more time on something than anyone else might reasonably expect. Teller. Now, watch as I exploit months of work on a silly project for a single Substack essay. Tears of Inti started as a need. My plan for making a living from writing boils down to 5 novellas and 12 zines a year. When I started thinking of ideas, however, my brain had to make things complicated. I'd grown a bit tired of the tried-and-true trifold. It had done well for me, but if I planned to do this indefinitely, I needed more variation than art style, author, and prose. This process is thanks to Adam, who drafts his projects in InDesign. Well, after he takes them out of his Notes app. That's what makes Adam a real artist, in my opinion, at least, while I shiver just thinking about the lack of backups. I bought some legal paper and began playing around with forms, landing on a flip-top style. Now that I had a design, I had to come up with the content. I can't believe I drafted it this way. Looking back, it's insane. Usually, I write in a different universe. With infinite possibilities now set before me, I had to narrow it down. For the first time ever, I leaned on the advice, write what you know. I have a fermented carrots recipe that I swear by. It also helped me with my GERD. That's just silly enough for me to jump off from. This is where inspiration finally struck. It wasn't the loud kind that makes you jump to your feet or dive into the narrative for hours. It was the quiet kind that can only be seen in hindsight. I came up with the first sentence, one of my favorite starting points for any story. I was born to a couple U.S. expats in Argentina in 1977. Great. I can work with that. Now, I just need to learn about Argentina, I guess. This is the whipsaw of drafting something in the real world, or at least how I experience it. You say something that feels good, then realize the repercussions. The responsibility sits on your shoulder until you start to research. Then you remember you love that part too. I collected information, inspiration, and questions to answer. I spent an ungodly amount of time on Google Maps tracking roads, mountain ranges, and towns. Bless Wikipedia. I'd devour pages of information looking for the next slice of reality to leverage. A narrative began to slowly, painfully form. I found designing and illustrating the artwork to be a pleasant reprieve from the task. Still, sometimes I need to write when and what I don't want to. That's one of the lessons I was teaching myself. I pushed through the first draft and breathed relief, then shelved it for a month. This is what I like to do in general, but I was happy to do it this time. When I picked it back up, it was a mess. It looked and felt all right, and Adam would help me tune that. But the story, yikes. No wonder it had been a pain. I'd stacked 15 plot points in half as many pages. The narrative was bloated and chaotic, and not in a fun way. This is the other half of writing in the real world. There's so much great stuff to steal, it's hard to draw the line. For me, it was at 20 pages. After a month of redrafting, I handed it off to Adam, who had some great ideas to style it up, the largest of which is the revised cover. He went through the piece, updating font and illustrations, taking it over the finish line. This whole process took about 4 months. That wasn't constant work, obviously, even if you count the sleeping, which included many naps. I worked on other projects, grew tomatoes, and even earned some money, believe it or not. But it takes that time, one way or another. I couldn't even tell you specifically how much of that time was drafting versus illustrating. I can tell you that several illustrations got made, but won't be used. There was an illustration of miso that took me the better part of a day, only to realize it belonged in an older draft. And I already told you about the 10 or so plot points I had to ditch. That one's on me. The cutting room floor is piled with scraps up to my knees, but I'm pretty happy with the zine. Even though it was tough, I'm happy with the process too. I learned so much about Argentina, saw some beautiful locations that might just inform some future travel if I'm lucky, and got to write something completely different than anything I've written before. It was a great experience. I may have an ego, but it's hard to call something I make magic. Still, I can attest that we, spent way more time on this than any person would think reasonable. Let's be real. This is a recipe for carrots that could be stated as carrots plus salt plus time. I could have written it as a blog post, or just taken some pictures, put them in line with text, printed the whole thing on 8.5 by 11, and folded it in half. Instead, I made it harder. I believe the weight of that invisible work is between the lines. I'm growing more comfortable with calling myself an artist. I might be silly, but I'm intentional. That's why all this time spent feels valuable. But hey, a few bucks wouldn't hurt. Tears of Inti. Alfred Buttress documents a simple hike north that turns into an almost sacred journey. Searching for a cure to the pain in his gut, or perhaps running from painful memories, Alfred carries no comforts of his past, save for a small journal in which he draws images that always seem to curve like a lost love's locks. Thanks for listening to 30 Degree Shift. Join me for weekly releases every Wednesday at 11:11 a.m. at 30degreeshift.com, or subscribe on Substack or your favorite podcast app.